On the night of our charity gala, the night we were supposed to celebrate kids getting instruments and canvas, my husband brought a speech to end my life in public. Not flowers, a speech. An auditor with a stained record, a communications director who didn't exist on payroll, and a secret vote he thought would bury me on stage while donors applauded. He forgot one thing. I keep receipts. By the end of that night, a lawyer would try to slip out the side aisle, a fake nonprofit would light up on a screen, and the board would learn whose laptop forged my name. But before the microphone burned a hole through his plan, there were the 3:06 a.m. whispers. The perfume that wasn't mine, a shell charity with a mailbox for a heart, and one stubborn sentence my father wrote that saved everything. If anyone has tried to make you small, especially in public, this story is your armor. I'm Clara. I run a tiny arts foundation in Seattle. I believed in generosity and rigor, and I was about to find out why you need both. Stay, because when I finally take the mic, you'll hear the one mind that ended his career and gave my life back. 3 months before the gala, I woke at 3:06 a.m. to whispers beyond our bedroom door. You learn the grammar of a house when you've lived in it long enough. The squeak of the third stair, the little thunk of the cabinet when someone is too tired to close it gently, the voice your spouse uses when the world is listening, and the voice he uses when it's only you. From the bed, I heard the one he uses for secrets. His vowels thinned, his consonants sharpened. It was the voice he had only ever used, as far as I knew, in the rooms of strangers where he needed to buy or sell something. We have to do this right. No mistakes this time. She'll fight, but she won't suspect until it's already done. Of course she won't, a woman's voice answered, flat and sure. We'll shepherd the votes. Donors don't care about process, only the headline. I lay motionless. He had left the door 3 inches open, as if the darkness could swallow guilt. I didn't move until I heard the careful click that meant he'd ended the call. He stood a second in the hall, breathing, then pushed the door open as if nothing had moved since midnight. He slid into bed and folded the covers over himself like a good husband does when he is trying not to wake his wife. He smelled of his office. He smelled of a strange perfume. In the morning, he was inconveniently affectionate. He brought me coffee and stood too close in the kitchen. He kissed my cheek and said, "How about we finalize the restaurant for Saturday before the board meeting? I want everything to be perfect." He says perfect when he wants to move me past my questions. I asked nothing. He left his phone face down on the counter. A calendar notification brightened the screen before fingerprints went black again. Call S at 11 a.m. Who's S? I asked, watering the basil in the window. He turned like I'd pinched his neck. For a second, there was panic, then that liquid composure smoothed over it. Sanders, he said, too calmly, one of the donors at settlement. Sloan is setting up the call. His left hand was steady. His right eyelid twitched. He has never learned to freeze his face's smallest muscles. I said. Busy day. At 9, his sister arrived uninvited. Sloan is the kind of woman who practices her smile in the mirror and then conducts it over a room. She stood in my doorway in a camel coat that still had the crease of the sales floor. "Clara, look at you, the picture of calm." She didn't wait to be asked inside. She never has. She moved down the hall with her fingertips grazing the framed photographs as if she were evaluating the wall's worth. then tipped her head at me in the living room. "Are we ready for the gala? Have you signed all the necessary documents?" "What documents?" "Foundation housekeeping," she said brightly. "I know process isn't your favorite song. I can hum it. Board procedure, continuity. Daddy's legacy must be protected. We can't leave things to chance." She trilled the word chance and then widened her eyes like a woman in a soap. "Where do you keep the trust binders? I noticed when we were here last month they weren't in the file cabinet. Please tell me you have them in a safe." I placed my teacup on its saucer and found that my hand did not shake. "I keep them somewhere safe, yes." She leaned back as if my answer pleased her deeply. "Good girl," she said. She softened her voice, which meant she was about to strike. "You know, if anything ever happened to you, God forbid, a car accident, a fall, the board would need instant access. It's the responsible thing, darling." "Responsible," I repeated. Her eyes flicked to my ring, then to the large oil my father painted of the two of us when I was 24. Me laughing up at him, a smear of cadmium on my cheek. "We all want what's best for the trust," she said, standing. "We just have to make sure improper hands never touch the funds." That afternoon, I ran my fingers over the combination lock of the safe in my studio and breathed until the numbers steadied under my hand. I read my father's letter again, the one he wrote me when he established the trust. He had tucked it behind the original trust instrument. In his neat and stubborn handwriting, he'd written, "Clara, light is not the absence of darkness. It is a decision that darkness does not get the last word. Protect what you build. Let generosity be fearless and rigorous. Love, Dad." The next morning, I called an old student turned friend, now an attorney, Maya Ortiz. Maya swam upstream through every possible current. First in her family to finish college, first to go to law school, first to speak to me without flinching when I cried over a contract. We hadn't grabbed coffee in 6 months. She answered on the second ring. "Maya," I said, "I need to talk to you today." "How bad is it?" she said softly. "I'm free at noon. Come to my office." Her office sat on the 12th floor of a glass box. She hugged me and then watched my face as I spoke. I told her about the call at 3:06 a.m., Sloane's visit, the whiff of perfume that wasn't mine, the calendar reminder that pretended to be a man named Sanders. "Okay," she said when I was done. She chewed in silence on a pencil, then set it carefully down. "Do you trust Evan?" "That's not a question that can be answered in one word." "Choose 2 words then." "I did, for many years. Now I don't know what to do with the 3rd word." She folded her hands. "You need to make a copy of every record. Download statements, photograph, scan, get offsite storage. Don't tip anyone off. If he's planning a procedural attack, removal vote, misappropriation claim, you want to be fully armed and silent. Keep your face calm. If you find anything, call me. If you don't find anything, call me. And Clara," she leaned forward, "don't go to war without picking your field." "My field?" "Where the confrontation happens, your father's trust structure. Evan can only win on process and perception. Donors or a chorus. The board is a chorus. You need one microphone. You need one clean moment." "Like a gala?" I said. My voice surprised me. Her mouth tightened. "I don't like courtrooms with cocktails, but if that's where they staged it, that's where you turn on the lights." I left Maya's office and did not cry in the elevator. I did not cry in the Uber or on the sidewalk or in my studio. I opened the safe. I made copies until the printer whirred itself hot. The trust instrument, the bylaws, the donor agreements, The last 3 years of bank statements, the last 2 of audited financials, vendor invoices, payroll reports for our tiny staff. Then I opened my laptop with the same feeling I had when I was 13 and stealing my mother's letters to make sure she was okay. Evan had not changed his password in years. For the first time, the simple sequence did not open. I tried my birthday, his, the day we moved into our house. Nothing. I stared at the cursor until my neck hurt. Then, on a feeling that was half instinct, half fatigue, I typed our first anniversary. Backwards. The screen unlocked. My lungs remembered their job. He had a folder called Harbor Projects. It held tidy spreadsheets with clean labels, vendor disbursements, donor outreach, prospectus drafts. He had a second folder called Hummingbird. Inside were PDFs of programmatic audits and internal control reviews, all new. I read the first line of the first report and felt a small, cold hand close around my ribs. It said, "In our preliminary review of the Whitmore Art and Youth Trust, we identified recurring irregularities in restricted fund allocation and commingling that present material risks to donor intent." A fabricated audit is a letter you send ahead of an ambush. He was staging an allegation so it would arrive with a chorus already singing its refrain. At the bottom of one memo, a signature. Reed Langford. Langford Compliance and Audit. My hand trembled then. Reed Langford had been censured by a state board 5 years earlier for methodological irregularities and material mischaracterization of evidence. A man for hire. A man who wrote sentences the buyer requested. Did Evan think I would never look? Did he believe that the woman he slept beside was a woman who folded easily? I scrolled past the PDFs and found a color-coded calendar with a private label. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. At 11 a.m., a recurring event. Call S. S appeared in his contacts as Sloan. Under notes for the call, board lists aligned. Confirm donors for confidence letter. If we leak to press, make it a local blogger, not the Times. Soft. He had another contact labeled PHE. I opened it. Phoebe Hart. Title, Communications Director, Whitmore Trust. We did not have a communications director. The note field read, "Keep bio light. Young, passionate, social. Do not overstate experience. Image sells." Maya's voice prickled behind my ear. "Don't pick your field without knowing where the exits are." I exhaled and scrolled again. There it was. A draft of a personal statement from Evan to be delivered in the event of Clara's non-compliance. He had practiced writing sentences that pretended sorrow. He had written, "It breaks my heart to bring these issues to light, but my fidelity is to the children we serve." He had the audacity to make the children his spear. That night, he came home with dahlia blossoms and truffles. He has always been efficient with beauty. He handed me the flowers and kissed me and said, "I was thinking we should open the gala with a few words about our journey." "You love a microphone," I said, not smiling. "About our partnership," he said, as if I had not spoken. "What we built, how grateful we are. It'll mean a lot to the board." He smelled of a new cologne. I told myself it was from walking past the fragrance counter. I told myself 100 small lies to see if one would fit for 5 minutes. "Evan," I asked, "do you love me?" He flinched like I'd turned a light on in a room where he was not dressed. What kind of question is that at the end of the day? The kind I need you to answer. His face softened into the shape he wears for photographs. "I love you in my way, Clara. You know I do." "In your way," I said, and took the flowers to the sink. "That's clearer than you know." 2 days later, I went to Rainier Pacific to request copies of the Trust's last 12 months of statements, this time with debit card logs and wire transfer confirmations. They took me to a little glass room. A young man with shoulders like a swimmer brought me a neat stack. I flipped to March and my stomach turned. Wires to a shell nonprofit called North Cascade Scholars. $12,000, $18,000, $9,000. We had never partnered with them. Their website was 3 pages. No board listed. The address was a mailbox at a co-working space. I checked the signatory, Evan. I checked the authorization covering non-programmatic disbursements. It had been amended. I had not signed it. Could you print the authorization update? I asked. My voice was steady. My skin was not. Of course, the young banker said. The PDF bore my digital signature. The date was 2 months earlier. My mouth went dry. I had not been in the bank that day. I listened to the hum of the printer. When he left the room, I took out my phone and photographed the screen to capture the properties of the signature file, who created it, when, on what machine. On the bottom line, a string of numbers and letters gave the file's origin away. It had been created on Evan's laptop and certified by Reed Langford's e-sign service. Forged. Tidy. Arrogant. I sent the photographs to Maya with the subject line, "There it is." She called me immediately. "You need a forensic accountant," she said. "Not for court, for the board. Reed is setting up a narrative. We will put a stronger narrative beside it that is true. I know a firm. They are quiet and thorough." Within 48 hours, I had hired Granton Ritter Forensics to prepare a discreet review. They promised a preliminary report before the gala. I did not sleep. I cleaned the studio shelves. I sorted paints by temperature. I watered plants that did not need water. 2 nights later, I lay in bed and heard Evan whispering again in the hall. This time his voice rose a notch. "We cannot wait," he hissed. "She is spooked. I can feel it." "Then accelerate," the woman's voice answered. "I'll have Phoebe prep the press release. Reed will deliver the memo to the board by noon Friday. We get the vote at the gala, on stage, before donors. She won't make a scene." "You're sure?" "Clara's a dove," she said. "She doesn't fight. That's what you married her for." I had to put my fist in my mouth to keep from laughing. Doves are birds. They fly. They survive cities and hawks and boys with slingshot arms. People confuse gentleness with a lack of options. The next morning, I did the smallest, most violent thing. I opened a new checking account in my own name and transferred half of our liquid personal funds. I left plenty. I was not trying to hurt him financially. I was refusing to be the woman whose money paid for her own ambush. The same afternoon, Granton Ritter's senior analyst, a woman named Melissa, arrived at my gallery. She had sharp eyes and gentle hands and a way of listening that made me want to tell her about my father's paint rags and the way the house smelled in October. We did not talk about anything but paper. She slid copies of bank statements into neat stacks, highlighted wires, drew circles around debit transactions to jewelry and hotels, none of which were mine. She did not raise one eyebrow. "We'll have a memo by Thursday," she said. "We'll keep it tight." "Will it be enough?" I asked. "If the board cares about truth more than rumor, yes. If they don't, it won't matter what's in any memo. You'll need light and a witness." Light? Eyes. People who aren't on someone's payroll, she said. "The only way to beat a narrative machine is to put it on a stage where lies die fast." I took a ferry to Bainbridge that night for no good reason except that the sound makes a different kind of sense when the city lets go behind you. I watched the dark water spread and listened to the engines. I remembered being 27 and buying my father his first pair of soft slippers with rubber soles when he started to shuffle. After he died, I'd promised myself never to fall asleep in a life I did not recognize. It turns out you can keep a promise like that and still wake up in a room made entirely of someone else's lines. On Friday, the day before the gala, I visited the foundation office and stood in the doorway a long time. We rent 2 rooms on the second floor of an old brick building with a candy store downstairs. Kids love the smell when they come to fill out scholarship applications. Chocolate and sugar and something almost like butter. Phoebe was there. She is younger than I am by 20 years and beautiful in the way of people who know they have never had to lift anything heavy. She smiled at me without quite making eye contact. "Clara," she said breathlessly, "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. I'm Phoebe. I'm helping with communications this season." "Who hired you?" I asked. "Evan brought me in, on contract," she said. Her voice was very bright. "He said you wanted someone to take social off your plate. We're doing new donor profiles, too. It'll be amazing." "Where are the contract and your W-9? She laughed a small, rehearsed laugh and waved vaguely at the desk. "All in the portal." The portal was empty. She had no work email. There was no invoice. There were photographs of her in a silver dress holding a champagne flute on an Instagram account called The Heart Part, with a caption that read, "Big hearts do the best work. #gala, #glam, #donors love me." I stood by my desk and watched her put a lipstick the color of pink sherbet on her mouth. "Are you coming to the gala?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely," she said. "Evan wants me there for the press line. He said he's got a speech planned that will change everything." "I bet," I said. I smiled. She did not see what was inside it. I asked our office manager, an older woman named Tessa, who had survived 3 executive directors before me, to close the door. "Do you trust me, Clara?" she asked, shrugging into her coat. "She's from another generation. She uses your first name like a formal greeting." "With my whole heart," I said. She nodded and lowered her voice. "I've worked in nonprofits for 30 years. Anytime somebody brings in a friend with a shiny title and no paperwork, it means the business you do isn't about the mission anymore. I saw your husband with that girl last week, holding her wrist like he paid for it. I didn't say anything because it's not my job, but you should know what I've seen." "I do," I said and squeezed her hand. Friday night, Maya came to my house with takeout. We ate on the floor, leaning against the couch. She brought a small portable drive. "Is that Melissa's memo?" She nodded. "It's clean. It's enough. It shows funds moving where they do not belong. It shows forged authorization. It shows a paper trail to North Cascade scholars. And it shows that entity is controlled by your sister-in-law using a registered agent. They're slappy with shells. Adrenaline washes you and leaves you dry." I held the drive like a relic. "Will the board read it?" "They will if they think someone else will see it," she said. "You need light. And once we get light, you need one more thing." "What?" "Time on a microphone." "Evan will give me that," I said. "He plans to hand me a microphone for my own execution." "Then you'll use it for your crowning," she said matter-of-factly. She is not a woman for small pep talks. She prefers clean nouns and knives that do their job. Saturday morning, I woke with a clear head and an old feeling. The summer after my father died, I taught a class called Fearless Beginnings. My students drew the first line in charcoal, then another across it, then another until the page forced its own subject. That confidence of building shape line by line came back to me before dawn. I brewed coffee. I opened a new text thread and sent a single message to a reporter I trust, a man named Kai who once wrote a thoughtful piece on our teens showcase. "Are you free tonight? Wear a jacket. Come to the Glass House. I'll give you a story with receipts." He wrote back one word: "Always." I dressed in a slate blue dress that made me look like I had a plan. I packed a simple folder into my purse. The trust instrument, the original amendment my father added in his crabbed hand, stating that in any dispute or proposed removal of the settler's designated steward, a supermajority vote must be preceded by delivery of documented evidence 14 days prior to the vote, and Melissa's memo. I slipped my father's letter behind the folder so I could feel his paper against my fingers. Evan looked like a magazine cover. He paced the living room, talking to himself, then pretending he was just rehearsing his gratitude. "This night is a dream," he said to me before we left. "Whatever happens, let's be gracious." "Always," I said. The glass house at Seattle Center is a long, bright lung of a room with a ceiling that holds light like a museum keeps time. The donors love it because the photographs are good. The board loves it because the board loves what donors love. When we walked in, everything glittered. Round tables with white linens, calligraphy place cards, a bar that looked like a small winter mountain. Sloan was already moving from table to table with her orchestrated smile. "Clara!" she cried, as if she were surprised to see me at my own event. "This is perfection." "Yes," I said. "It looks like a room where truth might live." She blinked once, too fast, and then pressed her lips together. "We'll do a quick board huddle at 8, just for housekeeping, all very dull." "Housekeeping," I repeated. Phoebe glittered in a silver dress, positioned near the step and repeat, as if it had been hung to match her. She took photos with donors, pressing her bare shoulder to theirs, whispering in their ears with a familiarity that made older men feel young and wives feel invisible. Evan shook hands, held elbows, tilted his head to listen. He looked like a man standing in front of a painting of himself. At 7:45, Melissa texted that she had taken her seat near the back. 2 minutes later, Kai arrived. I saw him tuck his press badge into his jacket pocket. He caught my eye across the room and gave me an almost invisible nod that said, "All right then." At 8, Sloan gathered the board in a corner. There were 9 of them, and I had chosen 7. I loved all 9 until 3 months ago. I stood at the edge listening to the rustle. Sloan lifted a folder like it weighed righteousness. "We have received serious concerns," she said in a hushed voice loud enough for donors to overhear. "We owe it to the children to act tonight. Donors require swift accountability." "You can't move to a removal vote without 14 days of notice," I said pleasantly. "Bylaws, Section 4.3, as amended in 2015. Sloan smiled sadly. "She's excellent at pity when she wants to cut you." "Sweetheart, when there's embezzlement, process must bow to reality." "Then present your evidence to the membership. We'll make a night of it." Evan's mouth hardened. I saw his jaw work like he was swallowing a dry pill. "Let's keep this pleasant, Clara. No drama." "No drama," I agreed. "Only facts." At 8:30, the lights dimmed. An MC I did not hire welcomed guests and made a joke about generosity that landed like a cocktail napkin. Then he called Evan up for a few words from our co-founder. Evan walked to the microphone with the same little bow he uses when you hand him a check. He cast his eyes over the room. All the faces turned toward him were faces he knew he could seduce. He lifted the paper in his hands, the paper I had seen in his downloads, and began to speak. "My friends," he said, voice warm, humble, practiced. "Thank you for gathering to celebrate the work of the Whitmore Art and Youth Trust. For 25 years, Clara and I have tried to shepherd a vision that began in her father's living room. Tonight should only be about gratitude, but fidelity sometimes asks us to do something harder. In recent months, issues have surfaced, deeply troubling issues that force us to consider the health of our house." Murmurs, heads tilted, wives squeezed their husbands' wrists. Evan placed his hand on his heart like he regretted having the one he owned. "As treasurer of the trust, it pains me to say I've had to engage in independent audit that identified patterns of misallocation and—" "Stop," I said softly. I stood at the edge of the dais. His eyes flicked to me. He did not step back. He lifted his chin, a man in his drama. Out of respect for the beneficiaries we serve, the board will— You do not have the right to move to a vote tonight, I said through my smile. I could feel my father's paper against my palm. I stepped up beside him. He tried to angle the microphone away from me. I didn't fight. I simply held mine. Out of respect for the beneficiaries we serve, I'd like to read a paragraph written by the settler of this trust. I unfolded the trust instrument with my father's amendment. This clause, I said, requires 14 days' notice before any removal vote, with documented evidence delivered to the steward under review. I received no notice. No evidence was delivered. There's a reason the foundation requires slow process for hot accusations. It protects mission from ambition.
Evan laughed, a practice sound meant to make me look hysterical. Everyone, you can see how flustered these issues make Clara. I'll ask you to grant me your patience. The independent audit. Who did you hire? I asked. If it's Langford, the board should note that he lost his license once and had it reinstated under supervision. A ripple went through the board. Reed Langford, seated near the aisle, had the bad sense to stand to leave. Melissa moved so quickly, you would have thought she had practiced this in another life. She intercepted him without touching him, then held out her card with a small shake of her head. Reed sat again as if his knees had dissolved. Let's not drag outside names into this, Evan said. We have to, I said. If you're going to kill a person's reputation in front of their own donors, you must use names. I turned to the guests. Evan mentions misallocation and commingling. Those are words that work very well on a microphone. They're also words people use when they want honest donors to nod. But the truth isn't hiding. It's printed on paper. I lifted the folder. In the last 6 months, funds left the trust to a shell nonprofit called North Cascade Scholars, which does not exist in any meaningful way. Those wires were authorized using my forged digital signature. North Cascade Scholars is controlled by a registered agent tied to Miss Slane Halstead, my husband's sister. Phoebe laughed and shook her head, the shake of a young woman who believes that everyone in the room is on her side. This is slander, she said lightly. I'm a volunteer. I nodded. That is what I needed you to say. I looked at Kai. He lifted his phone, face down, already recording. Clara, Evan snapped, enough. Not yet, I said. My voice didn't rise. I sat still through a great many things in my life. I will not sit still through this. You plan to stand here and publicly accuse me of a crime I did not commit so that the board would remove me, donors would steady your hand, and your friend with a shaky license could file a report that no one would read carefully? You did it because the trust endowment doubled this year after an unexpected bequest from a retired art teacher who believed in our kids. You did it because you want control. You did it because you thought I wouldn't fight back. Sloan stepped forward. Clara, sweetheart, this is humiliating. We can talk about your mistakes quietly. I don't have mistakes, I said. I have receipts. I nodded at Melissa. She stood and moved the AV table. The screen behind us flickered. Then a single clean spreadsheet filled it. The wire transfers to North Cascade Scholars, dates, amounts, authorization codes, and the file properties with the machine ID that matched my husband's laptop. Beside it, a copy of the 2015 amendment with my father's original signature in his fountain pen ink, the line that required notice, then a short, dry paragraph from Grant and Ritter. In our review, we failed to identify any non-programmatic disbursements authorized by Miss Whitmore. We did identify forged authorizations using her digital signature, originating on a device registered to Mr. Evan Halstead.
People assume donors are just checkbooks. They forget how many of them built their money carefully, how many of them smell a bad story 5 sentences before it reveals itself. The room went very quiet. Wives removed their hands from their husbands' wrists. People glanced at Sloane and then looked away as if whatever she had could be caught. Evan's face changed, just for a moment. The mask slipped, a flash of clean anger. He stepped toward me, then remembered what room he was in and turned the step into a gentleman's half bow. "Clara," he said, "you're upset. We all understand." It is a strange thing when a man tells you what you feel in order for him to do what he wants. "I'm not upset," I said. "I am very calm. I have never been more awake. My father left this trust so kids like the ones I teach on Saturdays could walk into a room and know they belong there. He did not leave it so that someone could stage a performance with me as the villain." Kai stood then, as if he had simply decided his legs needed stretching. He didn't ask a question. He didn't have to. The questions were lining themselves up without him. Tessa, from the back, spoke in her low voice to the board chair, a retired judge. The judge, who had been quiet for the first 20 minutes, lifted her chin and looked at Evan. "Mr. Halstead," she said, "we will not be moving to a vote tonight. The bylaw is clear. We will meet in 14 days, and we will do so in a room without donors." Sloane tried to smile. It looked like a cut that had not healed. "Of course," she said quickly. "We only wanted what's best for the children." "Then you'll have no objection to keeping your hands off the disbursement authorizations until we meet," the judge said. "We'll have counsel sort permissive signatures on Monday." Evan opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded. He tried for the scapegoat's expression, aggrieved for being caught in someone else's mess. It didn't quite land. I leaned to the microphone one more time. "Before we return to our regularly scheduled generosity," I said gently, "please know this. The Whitmore Art and Youth Trust is strong. Our scholarships continue. Our kids are waiting for their instruments and paint and shoes. Tonight, if you feel moved to give, give. Give because you believe in them, not because you pity me or judge him." People clapped then, that relieved, grateful clap that means a room has chosen a side. Gifts came in higher than last year. Tessa told me the next morning that the giving page crashed for 3 minutes. I went home in a quiet car. Evan didn't speak to me like a husband that night. He spoke to me like a man who had lost a boardroom vote. "You've embarrassed me," he said in the kitchen, not looking up. "Do you know what you've done?" "I turned on the lights," I said. "It startles rats." He set his glass down too hard. "Don't be vulgar." "You're right. Rats are intelligent, social creatures. They survive war." He breathed through his nose and stared at the tile. "We could still fix this, Clara. If you apologize publicly and step down temporarily, the board could be persuaded to leave this out of any formal record. Reed will write a..." "Finish that sentence, and I will ask Maya to file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's Charities Division before breakfast," I said, "and I will send Kai every document I have. Please do not mistake dignity for weakness anymore. It's making you sloppy." He looked up then. For a second, I saw it. The boy he must have been, desperate to be the hero of a story. It almost made me sad. Then I remembered what he tried to do to me with a microphone and a crowd and a sentence written by a liar. I went to the sink and washed my father's ring, as if that could take the night out of it. I slept on the studio couch because the house needed a geography for its new weather. In the morning, my phone vibrated with messages. Donors wrote to thank me for my clarity. Board members asked if I could meet. Kai's piece went live at noon. Community trust or personal fiefdom, a foundation's gala asks hard questions and answers them. He didn't mention the names of anyone who didn't deserve the mention. He wrote my father's name kindly. He wrote about our kids like he had been in the room when they picked up their brushes for the first time. At 3, Phoebe came to the gallery. She wore sunglasses like a car commercial and moved them to her head with a little flourish that would have been cute 2 years ago. She stood in my doorway without stepping in and said, "You made a mess." I said, "You should resign. If you return whatever you were paid and write me an email confirming receipt of payments without paperwork, I will consider your foolishness youth and leave your name out of anything official." She blinked. It took her a second to understand I wasn't threatening a reputation. I was offering her a way to grow up. She lifted her chin. "He told me you were a dove," she said quietly. "You are something else. I am not interested in being named anything by you," I said. "Email me by 5. At 5:02, she sent the message. At 5:05, Maya forwarded it to our forensic team. We breathed like that for a week. Steady, careful, full. 14 days later, the board met in a small conference room without donors or waiters or microphones. Melissa presented her findings. The retired judge asked good questions. Sloan spoke and then stopped speaking when she realized no one was nodding. Evan's new lawyer tried to suggest we were misinterpreting and then stopped suggesting when Maya asked him to define misinterpretation. At the end of the hour, the board moved, not to remove me, but to suspend Evan as treasurer, refer all financial irregularities to outside counsel, and request that Sloan recuse herself from all matters until an investigation concluded. No vote was taken on removal. None would be. The retired judge didn't smile when she carried the motion. She looked at me and said, "I hate it when people confuse altruism with cowardice." I laughed then for the first time in 3 weeks. It surprised all of us. Within a month, Evan lost his job. It did not mention the foundation in the internal memo. These things never do. It cited culture fit, which is how companies end a relationship when they are not free to say fraud. He called me twice late at night and hung up when I answered. He texted me, "We can fix this," as if what had happened were a broken shelf. I called a locksmith. I changed the door code. I divorced him. The only dramatic thing about that sentence is how much peace was waiting on the other side of it. There were papers, there were numbers. There was a dog-eared photograph of our wedding my mother asked me to keep for history's sake. There was no shouting. The judge in King County Superior Court read through the settlement and then looked at both of us. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said to me, "you're certain?" "I'm certain," I said. Evan's lawyer asked for half of the value of the trust administrative building as if that were mine to give, as if he understood anything about what was and wasn't inside those walls. The judge denied the request before his sentence completed itself. Afterward, he stood outside the courthouse under a sky that looked like soft tinfoil and said, "Forgive me." I nodded politely. "I wish you the peace that comes with telling yourself the truth," I said. I saw the sentence hit him and fail to find purchase. I went home to the studio and opened the windows and taught a teenager named Jaime how to draw a hand that looks real by not drawing the lines you think you see. "It's about the spaces," I told him. "It's always about the spaces." Sloan sold her mid-century house in Queen Anne and moved to an apartment in Ballard with a nice view and a smaller closet. Phoebe vanished from social and then reappeared in Napa, marketing wine. Reed sent apology letters through his lawyer that never used the word apology. The State Charities Division completed its review and published a quiet note that said nothing flashy and everything useful. The trust went on. We gave more scholarships that year than the year before. I moved back into the rooms of my life, but differently. I gave the gallery 2 days a week and the foundation the rest. I started an artist in residence program in a rented cabin on the Oregon coast, a place where you can hear your breathing better. Twice a month, I drove down Highway 101 to a small town that smells of evergreens and salt. The first time I unlocked the cabin door, I walked straight to the back window and stood for a long time at the sight of the ocean. The waves sounded like someone tearing paper slowly. My father would have loved it. I stapled butcher paper along one wall and painted 4 thick, sweeping blue lines that didn't need to become a C to be a C. On a rainy Wednesday, a thin envelope arrived with Evan's handwriting. He has neat penmanship. He always did. I made tea because I didn't want to be the woman who shakes when paper comes. I read it at the kitchen table. It said, "Clara, I know I do not deserve a reply. I am writing to say that I understand now. I thought I was the protector. I thought I was the man with a plan. I thought you would never draw your own. I lost you because I spoke about fidelity and practiced ambition. I will not ask you to undo what I did. I will not ask for mercy. I wish you light for the rest of your days. Evan." I put the letter in a drawer where I keep things that taught me something. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel much of anything, except a gentle wash of gratitude for having chosen when the world gave me a chance to choose. I wrote him back 2 sentences that said, "Thank you for your letter. I wish you healing." In November, the foundation hosted a small dinner for our scholarship recipients in a school auditorium that smelled like new rubber and chalk. We didn't invite donors. We invited parents and teachers. A girl named Ophelia brought her cello and set it on a stage with duct tape on the floor to mark where her chair should go. She played a Bach prelude with the kind of concentration that makes you believe in God, even if you don't. Her mother held both hands over her mouth in the second row and cried without wiping her face. Afterward, Ophelia came up to me and said, "I didn't know I could sound like that." I said, "You always did." I walked home that night through streets that still glowed from the day's rain. The city looked like a painting of itself. I stood in my studio and touched the edge of my father's work table. I lit a candle and set it near the picture of the 2 of us. I poured a small glass of red wine but didn't drink it. I wanted something I couldn't name and then realized I already had it. If you know only this about me, know this. On the night my husband tried to end my life with a speech, I did not fight because I was angry. I fought because I have always been a steward of my father's vision, of my kids' futures, of the quiet, ferocious truth that generosity and rigor are not enemies. A woman can be gentle and exact. She can build a world where the people who stand next to her are asked to be honest. She can choose to be the kind of light that makes darkness tell you what it intends before it ever arrives. After the gala, I found myself telling my students a new story about drawing hands. "You don't need to outline a hand," I said, holding my own in the evening light. "You draw what happens around it, and the hand shows up." I showed them the spaces where no charcoal went. I showed them the white that becomes a knuckle by the absence of shade. They looked at my palm like I had just pulled a coin from behind their ears. One Saturday, an older man wandered into the gallery while I was sweeping. He was the kind of man who moves like he's been holding his breath for 50 years. He stopped in front of a watercolor I had done the previous winter. Sketchy, pale, a study of a fairy deck seen through rain. "That's my commute," he said, surprised at his own softened voice. "It looks kinder here." "I leave out the elbows that jab," I said. "I keep the cold. I like the cold." He stood with his hands in his pockets a long time. "You saved a thing," he said at last, Whatever it was, you saved it." He didn't look at me, but his voice said he knew something, even if he didn't know he knew it. "No," I said. "I didn't save it. I kept it from being taken. There's a difference." He nodded like that was a sentence he could keep. He left with the painting under his arm, wrapped in brown paper, the twine tied neatly, the way my father used to tie boxes at Christmas. A year passed. The foundation set sturdier on its new legs. Our bylaw amendments got more teeth. The people who had been friends only with our money found other tables to lean their elbows on. We made new friends who talked less about their own generosity and more about kids' bookshelves and hunger and bus routes. Sometimes when I walked down the street, I saw someone look at me like they were about to say, "Are you?" And then they didn't, because this is still a city and we leave each other our air. Sometimes I still woke at 3:06 a.m. with that line of memory running its tongue over my teeth. And then I would get up and make tea and stand in the studio and draw a single dark line across a new page, and then another, until the page chose what it wanted to be, and the hour softened. One evening in March, a board member sent me a link to a video of a panel on nonprofit governance. The speaker, a woman with short gray hair and a voice that could break a stone, said, "The problem is not that people are greedy. The problem is that they think their hunger and their virtue are the same thing." I wrote the sentence on the back of an envelope and tucked it in my wallet to carry around just in case I forgot it. At the end of April, I drove down to the coast to check on our resident, a poet this time, a woman in her 30s who walked the bluff in a red beanie like an exclamation point. The sea was noisier than usual. I unlocked the cabin and set a bowl of lemons on the table. My phone buzzed. It was my mother, whose voice stays young even as her hair silvered. She wanted to know what kind of cake I wanted for my birthday. I told her, lemon with buttercream, the way she made it when I was too small to stir. When I hung up, I sat and listened to the ocean tearing its paper. Before I left, I wrote one sentence on the cabin's chalkboard where we ask each resident to leave something for the next one. It said, "The light you turn on is not only for you." And below it, I drew a simple line drawing of a hand. Not its outline, what happened around it, the shape it made by what the world did not touch. I drove back to Seattle in time for our spring showcase. Teens in borrowed shoes stood in a line that looked like hope. They bowed too fast. They sang too quiet. They played like the rooms they wanted to live in might be listening. I sat in the second row with my knees pressed to the chair in front of me and cried with my hands in my lap so no one would see. If I have learned anything from that night under the glass house, it is this: kindness without rigor is an invitation. Rigor without kindness is a closing door. The world we are building needs both. And when someone tries to sell you a story of protection that looks like someone else's erasure, go find the microphone. Say the plainest thing. Hold your paper steady. Remember your father's letter. Don't wait for someone to tell you that you're allowed to speak. Later that summer, after the scholarship letters went out and the gallery's AC decided to retire, I sat on the floor with the door propped open, letting the warm air argue with the cool concrete. A new student dropped by with a sketchbook under her arm and asked in a voice that wasn't loud, "Is it okay to draw badly first?" "It's the only way," I said. "Draw badly with intention, as if you mean it. Truth arrives that way." In the evening, when the city softened, I walked home under the half-quiet elevated train and felt the odd, clean happiness of a life returned to its rightful owner. On my porch, I kissed my fingers and touched the door frame, an old habit I had never told anyone about. The house hummed. Somewhere a neighbor practiced trumpet, somebody burned garlic, somebody laughed. I stood in my kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter where I had once stood and listened to a man plan to make me small. I looked at the empty space where a vase of dahlias had once set all the colors on fire and didn't miss them at all. When you watch a person plan your end, you learn they've never looked at you clearly. The sweetest revenge is not a downfall or a headline or a sentence that sounds like poetry. It is a morning where you put your feet on the floor and do the thing you were meant to do before anyone thought to draft a memo about you. You lift your pen. You show up for a child with a cello. You make coffee for your mother and drive to a cabin that needs lemons and light. You turn on the lamp. You do not curtsy to darkness again.
If this story has a moral, it is not a grand one. It is ordinary and precise. Keep your documents. Keep your dignity. Keep the names of the people who showed up when you spoke the plain thing. Let love be the name you give to the act of guarding what you build, not the excuse you make to stand quietly in a room where someone else rehearses your ending. And if you find yourself with a microphone in your hand and your heart beating like a bird, remember what my father wrote me with his stubborn, lovely ink. Light is a decision that darkness does not get the last word. I decided.